Hi, in this particular video I'm going to be discussing David Parker Ray, who's also known as the Toy Box Killer. Very many thanks to Alex Brooks, who suggested this case for an analysis. You guys seem to particularly like sending me disturbing cases, and this one's took me a little bit longer to do because I just had to keep on taking breaks from it. I am going to be discussing the psychology of David Parker Ray and his behaviour. However, it is sometimes necessary to include some details within that. Therefore, this video contains some details of rape, kidnap, torture, paraphilia, sadomasochistic acts and bestiality. If you do want more details about the crimes themselves, I cover some cases on my podcast and I do include all of the details of the crime in that one. David Parker Ray. He soundproofed the trailer of a truck, which he called his toy box, and he equipped it full of items used for sexual torture. He would kidnap 5 or 6 girls a year, and he would hold each of these girls as captive for around 3 to 4 months before releasing them. Some of them he killed, he didn't release them. During this period, he would sexually abuse the victims. Sometimes he would involve his dog or his wife or partner who participated willingly in her husband's crimes, and often torture them with surgical instruments. Then Ray would either kill the victims or drug them with barbiturates in an attempt to erase their memories or induce amnesia of what happened to them before he abandoned them at the side of the road. Ray was convicted of kidnapping and torture in 2001, and he received quite a lengthy sentence, but he was never convicted of murder. He died of a heart attack about 1 year after his convictions in 2 cases, the second of which resulted in a plea deal. During his childhood, Ray and his younger sister Peggy lived with their grandfather. His parents were Cecil and Nettie Ray. Due to their poor financial situation, they lived with their paternal grandparents. Cecil and Nettie divorced, and Cecil took full custody of the children and he left them with his parents. David and Peggy had very little contact with their parents. However, their violent alcoholic father would occasionally visit. David's father supplied him with magazines that depicted sadomasochistic pornography. As he was shy and socially awkward, he was bullied by his peers, and that led to a secret fascination with sadomasochism. His sexual fantasies of raping, torturing, and even murdering women developed during his teen years. Around that time, his sister discovered his sadomasochistic drawings. She also found pornographic photographs of bondage acts. When their grandmother died, they were both then left with their grandfather, who was very strict and used physical punishments. As a child, Ray was bullied by his peers for his shyness around girls, and these insecurities drove him to drink and abuse drugs. After he completed high school, he worked for the US Army as a mechanic, and he received an honourable discharge from the Army. Ray was divorced 4 times and he had 2 children, and he came across to people who knew him as devoted and hardworking and a family man. As I said at the beginning, this is a particularly disturbing crime, so I will do my best to keep any disturbing details of the crime to a minimum. David Parker Ray kidnapped a number of women, and he took them to this specially adapted trailer where he kept them. That trailer reportedly cost around $100,000. It was soundproofed, and in the middle of it, it had a gynecologist chair. Around the edges and on the walls, there were a whole host of toys and devices that he used on the women that he kept captive. He'd spent a considerable amount of time planning and saving up for this trailer, which shows a very disturbing level of determination that he had to hurt these women. He would use a trickster approach sometimes on these women. We know that he approached one victim, Cynthia Vigil, in a parking lot and pretended to be an undercover policeman. He told her that she was under arrest for solicitation of prostitution, and then he handcuffed her. He put her in his vehicle and took her to this toy box trailer. Cynthia managed to escape after 3 days, and I will tell you a little bit more about that shortly. He had prepared a tape recording which he would play for these women when they first arrived. I eventually found a link to the transcripts to that tape on Reddit, and everyone in that thread was saying that caution should be exercised when deciding whether or not to view those transcripts because of the graphic nature of it. So me being me, threw caution to the wind, and it was particularly disturbing. But then I found the actual tape of his voice on YouTube, and that was very chilling. He speaks very calmly. He tells these women what he's going to be doing to them and what they can expect while he's got them there. He tells these women what they can expect. He tells them what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do whilst they're there. He would tell them that they can only speak when they're spoken to, and they must call him and his partner master or mistress. He outlines in very graphic detail what he's going to be doing to them should they break any of the rules, which he then sets. He tells them that they'll be chained with a metal collar around their neck. He tells them that he's going to torture them by using electric shocks as one example, cutting them, binding them, inserting objects into their vagina and anus, cutting nipples off, and in general hitting and hurting them. He then goes on to say that she would be raped by some of his friends, and they like to strap her to a wooden device that restrains her and exposes her genitals to onlookers, and who will go on to rape her many times. He then says he's going to be bringing in his large male dog to engage in bestiality. He also tells her that his partner will be ordering her to engage in sexual acts, either alone or with him. He would sometimes suspend the victims from chains on the ceiling and use whips, blades and even saws on them. He placed the women onto a gynecology chair with their legs in stirrups, exposing their genitals. There was a mirror on the ceiling so that the victims could see how they were being raped and tortured. Inside the torture room, along with numerous sex toys, torturing implements, syringes and detailed diagrams showing ways of inflicting pain, there was a homemade electrical generator which was used for torture. To prevent the women from reporting the crimes, as I said earlier, Ray would drug them with various drugs to induce amnesia in them. One woman remained uncertain whether she recalled the abuse and whether these were just nightmares that she'd actually made up or whether it just happened. She only realised that was true after she'd been in contact with the FBI. After questioning, she came to remember her mistreatment in increasing detail as time went on. He would drug the women, then hypnotise them to forget everything. He let several women free. However, he is known to have killed some too. There is a lot of information out there that give many more details about his crimes itself, and I have listed a number of resources in the video description so that you can read through them if you choose to. If you do choose to read the letter or listen to that tape recording on YouTube, I would suggest using extreme caution before doing so. From a behavioural point of view, we can identify then that he's a sadomasochist. Sexual sadism disorder and sexual masochism are defined as receiving sexual arousal from the humiliation, pain and suffering of an individual. It is thought to overlap with multiple other conditions as well. All of these come under the general term of psychosexual disorders. He also had a paraphilic disorder. Paraphilic disorders are recurrent, intense, sexually arousing fantasies, urges or behaviours that are very distressing or even disabling, and that involve inanimate objects, children or non-consenting adults. It can even be suffering or humiliation of either themselves or partner or a victim. These fantasies and sexual desires aren't an issue when they're carried out between two consenting adults. Some people may have paraphilic interests, but don't meet the criteria for a paraphilic disorder. The unconventional sexual arousal patterns in paraphilias are considered pathological disorders only when they're intense and persistent, as well as causing significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or any other areas of functioning, or they harm or have the potential to harm others. People with a paraphilic disorder might have an impaired or a non-existent capacity for affectionate, reciprocal emotion and sexual intimacy with a consenting partner. These sexual preferences can develop because of anxiety or early emotional trauma that interferes with the normal psychosexual development. If a person is exposed to highly charged sexual experiences early in life, it can develop into a pattern of dysfunctional sexual arousal then. The causes of these psychosexual disorders can lie sometimes in feelings of guilt, stress, nervousness, fear, anxiety, or even in previous emotional or physical traumas that they've gone through. David Parker Ray's first experience of sadomasochism allegedly came in the mid-1950s when he was just a teenager. After his father left him and his sister to live with their elderly grandfather, Ray began to develop this secret fascination with sadomasochism. He even alleged to his first wife that it was around that age when he first kidnapped a woman, tied her to a tree and tortured her and then murdered her. However, authorities have not been able to verify that account. In an interview, his first wife said that she had been aware of Ray's fantasies and fetishes, as she puts it, but she didn't know the extent of those. Ray reportedly engaged in sadomasochistic relationships with prostitutes unbeknown to his wife. Throughout his offending, he found people with similar interests to him. Some of his partners had reportedly helped him commit some of these crimes over the years. At the time of his arrest, his partner, Cindy Hendy, was also arrested. During the investigation that followed, authorities found 2 more accomplices. Ray's daughter, Jessie, helped him by drugging and luring victims to his house. A friend of his, David Yancey, admitted to strangling his former girlfriend, Marie Parker, after Ray had kidnapped and tortured her. Plus, there were neighbours of his who didn't report him, who didn't say anything. There were the men who knew, who raped the victims. They knew that they'd been kidnapped and were being held against their will. All of these people around him were reinforcing Ray's thinking, beliefs and attitudes. They were validating it. Some people have said that he treated these women like animals, but most of us wouldn't even treat an animal like that. He has no empathy whatsoever. He doesn't see these women as people. He sees them as objects that he is entitled to use in any way that he chooses. I think it's maybe likely that Ray is a psychopath. Psychopaths are defined as individuals who have absolutely no concern for the feelings of others. They have a complete disregard for any social obligations, and they have this inability to form lasting emotional ties with people. Ray had been divorced 4 times, which suggests that he may have become bored fairly easily and needs a lot of stimulation. These marriages could also have broken down because of his aggressive and his controlling tendencies. Psychopaths are characterised as being selfish and remorseless individuals, and they use other people for their own selfish needs and desires. They often are very impulsive, they're chronically unstable, they have antisocial lifestyles. Psychopaths often engage in promiscuous sexual behaviour, and because of that they're much more likely to have lots of shorter term relationships rather than long term ones. They're callous, they lack empathy, they're unable to recognise and feel anything of what another person might be going through. They also have that lack of responsibility. They fail to take responsibility for their own actions. Psychopaths can be typically violent towards other people, and it's been reported that psychopathy is particularly high amongst serial rapists who kill their victims. And that's because their lack of empathy and their impulsive nature and their violent tendencies lead to that. Ray's arrest only came about when one of his victims managed to escape. Ray had gone to work, leaving his accomplice Cindy Hendy in charge of that victim. Hendy had left keys on the side while she was taking a phone call. Cynthia Vigil managed to get these keys and began to unlock herself. Hendy noticed and the pair got into a struggle. Vigil smashed a lamp over her head. Vigil then stabbed her in the neck with an ice pick and ran off. She fled wearing only that iron slave collar and padlock chains. She ran down the road looking for help, which she got from a nearby homeowner who took her in, comforted her and called the police for her. Her escape led officials to the trailer and they then found and arrested Ray and his accomplices. After the publicity surrounding their arrest, another victim, Angelica Montano, came forward. Now, she told a very similar story to what all the other victims had been through. She said that she'd reported the incident to the police at the time, but there had been no follow-up whatsoever. Ray kept very detailed notes in his trailer about what he'd done to these women. Sometimes even videotaped it. Now that is fairly common of all serial killers because they often keep some kind of memento such as jewellery, clothing, photographs, videos, notes, and these mementos allow them to relive the crime over and over again. One of the videos that the police found led to the identification of another victim, Kelly Garrett. She was identified because of a tattoo on her ankle. It later emerged that she'd gotten into a fight with her husband. She decided to spend the night playing pool with friends in a bar. Garrett knew Ray's daughter Jessie, who she'd been at the bar with that evening. Jessie had drugged the beer that she was drinking, and when she went outside she was struck from behind and then knocked out. Ray then took her to a trailer and attached a dog collar and leash to her neck. She was very heavily drugged, but she did wake up several times while she was being tortured. Ray then slit her throat and dumped her body on the side of a road and believed that she was dead. She was later treated for her injuries at a local clinic, and neither her husband or the police believed her story. Her husband believed that she'd been cheating on him the night that she was attacked. Later he did file for divorce and Garrett moved to Colorado. In conclusion, then, this is a very disturbing case where David Parker Ray preyed on women, kidnapped them, imprisoned them and kept them as sex slaves. He found chaining and torturing these women sexually arousing. Throughout his life, he recruited many people to help him to offend. He had no empathy at all and he didn't think of these women as people. He saw these women as objects that he could use whenever he wanted to. I do hope that you found today's video interesting. More importantly, I hope that you learned something new from it. Thanks for watching then. Bye for now.